Dr. Curry, and we will certainly have questions. I'm working on that right now. Which I want to remind everybody here that Alex and Michelle have the green sheets for questions. They're collecting them now, and comments. Please come through with any questions that you have. And I will turn to the Planning Commission members and ask if there are any questions that you have for Carnegie Development.
You know, I had one question relative to your, you had indicated townhomes, 60 townhomes. Are they going to be of a fee simple for sale status, or are you going to hold those as rental units to the project also?
We anticipate they're going to be fee simple for sale units with their own internal parking. They're basically going to be self-contained with the Muse as all green space. I think it's 80 by 200. Is that 16? 16, yeah, 65 by 200. That's going to all be just green area with parking on the south side of the entrance.
Excellent, thank you.
I'll just remind the Planning Commission to make sure your microphone's on for the benefit of the audience and the people watching on the World Wide Web.
I have a question/comment. So part of the plan development, goal of the plan development zoning is to create quality development in line with the community vision. And an objective of that vision is to expand upon green space in the city. I think this is a great opportunity to do so. And I love the location of the proposed public space. And I think it's a great opportunity to bring some green space into the city, which is, as you all know, a built-out first-ring suburb. Is there any way or any possibility to integrate some green space into that space?
We have. If you can go back to that slide on the streetscape, if you notice where all the tree planters, there's going to be planters throughout the area that'll all be green. We're going to use all locally sourced plant materials, which I don't think we mentioned earlier. So it'll help us with sustainability in terms of, if you look through that, there are going to be those types of planters throughout the green space. Plus, we're looking at doing the green roof on the Curtis Block building, and we're putting greenery on the amenity deck. That'll all be green. And also outside of the top floor where there's going to be a banquet and conference facility for corporate use and community use, that area outside of, there's going to be an open air area there. That will be green also.
I was thinking maybe some additional green space.
Well, during the design phase, we are happy to entertain that, and if we can figure out, if KA can figure out how to work more green space into the plaza without losing the functionality of the plaza, we're happy to do it.
Great. Mr. Chair, thanks for bringing up the volume. We're having, I think a few members of the public are having a tough time hearing, so I'll ask all the commission members and ABR, just take the mics and bring them up close as you're speaking, primarily for our members in the back of the audience. Thanks, guys.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Mr. Metzger.
I wanted to address the public space on the acre corner where you have the stage set up and then the colonnade. How about now? Is that good? How about that? All right. Sweet. The question I have is it seems as though the design representation sort of turns its back on the public space of the city outside of the project and sort of turns the public space inward towards the project. Can you address how that would shake out in terms of a large gathering that might be more, you know, when we have street events and things that go up and down Detroit, everything's kind of oriented towards the main street and the traffic flow and the pedestrian flow there. This seems like it kind of captures it inward. That doesn't seem very public to me.
George?
Sure. I don't think that's certainly a valid concern, but I think it's important to note that there really is a tremendous amount of transparency and accessibility that's occurring along Detroit and Bell Avenue. The piers that are identified there are just really to create kind of like a visual barrier. There's no other barrier that's associated with it. So there is that ability to permeate between the interior of the plaza and the exterior. And there, I believe, a seamless connection in that regard. But we're certainly open to other suggestions to help promote that concern if that's something that you think isn't being properly addressed here.
Well, just the way it comes across.
Okay, certainly understood.
Question on the, and George, maybe you want to stay there, the expandable design of the mid-rise facility, that's, what is expandable about that? And a specific question about that is, with a high-rise concept, that has to be decided at the front end. That's not an expandable later after you've built option.
That's correct, because if we were to try and accommodate that kind of expansion, the infrastructure that would be required to permit it, in other words, to go up later on, would have to be built in previously, and that places a premium on the cost of the project. So we have to go through our marketing analysis and make a determination over the period and the transition that exists here. And I understand it to be a period of time that could potentially be more than a year or even longer. I mean, the point being, we don't know exactly how that transition is going to occur, but at some point there is going to be a decision that needs to be made, whether it's going to be that high-rise or the mid-rise. Absolutely.
Good, I wanted to clarify that. So then what exactly is expandable when the references to expandable at the mid-rise concept? What was it that the elements are expandable?
You could add a number of floors going up from where you are now. If there's a happy medium, in our meeting with the city, some of the people in economic development believed that we could get more units and they were marketable. We could add 2 or 3 floors on without going all the way up. Everything stays the same except the number of housing units.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Coyne.
Mr. Chair, my question has to do with, it's wonderful to see the front door, and unfortunately at the Planning Commission, sometimes we have to think about the back door. So where does your delivery and your dumpster, I noticed on the site plan it seemed like there were 2 horizontal drives that were shown. Is that primarily the service area?
Correct. Actually, if you want to back up to the floor plan, the site plan, we can make... yeah, you can, sure, certainly. Go ahead, Richard. This is Richard Wilden from KA Architects.
Hi, everyone. So the middle of the slide, right behind the main commercial building, what we're proposing is 2 driveways in, one off Marlowe, one off of Bell, each of them with full garage covering. There's going to be some issues with scheduling deliveries and pickups and so forth, but the idea was to have 2 separate service areas to completely and transparently service the retail space and the office space, but also allow for very public connection at the first floor and the second floor from the garage to the main plaza space. So if you park in the garage, there's a good image, you can walk right through the building into the plaza without having any sight or knowledge that you're right next to a service dock, which is backing up to you. We realize there's could be traffic issues, there's noise issues. We got it as close to Detroit as we could in this particular layout to impact as few residents as possible. We thought the Family Health Center side on Bell would be a little less sensitive an issue, but the Marlowe side is something we're really aware of, and this was a solution we thought had a lot of benefits, but we're open to other ideas. This is not cast in stone by any means in our mind. We just wanted to throw out some really good ideas that we thought would be evocative for people, but we want to work with all the stakeholders and the community at large to make sure this is a project that everybody's happy with.
Well, and to your point, Richard, I want to remind you that we were sensitive to that concern. The access to the service courts was very, 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 very carefully looked at. And so the only way you're going to know that service is there is because of the opening. It is a covered service court, in effect. So to that extent, we're hoping that that minimizes some of the visibility and positioning of that.
Mr. Chair, we're going to try to get through 2 more questions from Planning Commission.
So I have a question. It seems to be there's kind of the alternative, either the high-rise concept or the mid-rise concept. You spoke a little bit about some potential wiggle room, and I know kind of the planning study that the city commissioned and, you know, the proposers looked at kind of said that maybe up to 350 housing units could be supported by a site like this. You're proposing 260, you know, to go up to, you know, 450 is above that, but is there a way to get maybe 150 extra units that would still be kind of support, maybe not all the way to high rise, but something in the middle?
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we wanted to investigate further and offered you those two alternatives, and certainly something in between is very viable. We obviously, as we mentioned before, have to make a decision in that regard pretty quickly, but we want to engage the community and we want to engage the city in that regard to help us with that and understand it clearly, not only through our own market analysis, but your input as well.
Could I tag on that for a second? Relative to the differential between the 200 units, 200 plus the 60, and the larger amounts, what did your feasibility say relative to the significant difference in the frictional vacancy between the 200 and the 350 or 400 units?
At this point in time, we don't believe, based on our feasibility and market analysis, that the market will support 400-plus units without, you know, giving discounts and doing all the things that we don't want to do with this project. We want to let the high-rise across the street, the one that Brad Coates doing, we hope by the time we're ready to go, that building will be finished and leased. We are marketing to a different type of buyer and renter, and we want to keep the price point at a higher number. And so far, there isn't a lot of market analysis that says Lakewood can support that. But we believe that there is. I think the Cleveland bubble is going to burst, and that's why we are open to expanding it. We are very confident with what we've designed that we will get that leased up at the market rate numbers that we're talking about that we need to get on this project.
For the big one or the little?
For the mid-rise.
Yeah,
But
I agree with that.
Yeah, but we think that over the next 12 to 24 months, while we're in design and while the construction is going on, the market could change. And we think if the market changes, it's going to change in a way that's favorable to Lakewood.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, we'll transition over to Dave and the Architectural Board of Review for some questions.
Great, thank you. I think since we have 10 minutes for this segment, I'll kick off with one, and we can go with a reply, and then we're just going to go down the line and try to cover we have a long list, but this is a very exciting chance to ask these questions. My initial thought, and I'll back up to when we were reviewing designs for the health center. Sorry, when we were reviewing designs for the health center across the street, had to do with the hope that somewhere down the road, and we had no idea what was going to happen at that time, that you know, a public space would occur over there. So much so that the design of the health center took the entrance from the south end of the building, and we all worked together to push it as far up to Detroit as we could. That thought being that there's going to be a lot of activity on that corner, and someday there'd be a lot of activity across the street. So I was happy to see in this proposal the plaza idea. The question I have is how much thought and research went into finding out how that plaza might really work for our, not only day-to-day, but also our festivals and things that we have, because I feel like the planting at this point kind of is creating a wall from the rest of the development, or the rest of the street. So if you're there for Light Up Lakewood or something, it's full of people, and it's people. We like to close the streets for parties around here. So if there's a way to connect that to that activity versus kind of make it a standalone, or maybe it's an adjunct to other ones, but the materials that create that barrier are something that we'd be concerned about.
George?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Doctor. I think that's a valid concern. We are very sensitive to trying, again, to integrate this particular plaza with whatever community activities are occurring in the city. And I think if you back up for a second, we can show how there is an event layout that we identify how exactly we could go ahead and introduce particular tents and cubicles that make up the, there you go, that's one right there. If you see, there is a an opportunity here to create a bunch of modules that could ultimately be some kind of a market. Now, this landscaping that occurs out here doesn't necessarily have to be that way and act as a barrier. This is really just trying to show some green space. Again, we're very open to trying to create this as permeable and as transparent as possible through here so that the interaction can meander through the entire plaza with these various modular patterns that maybe would be suited for booths or, as I mentioned, tents or for a market or a festival of any kind. So your point is well taken, and we would move and work to try and address it as best we can by creating that boundary as permeable as possible.
Great, thank you, George.
You might want to follow up.
Yeah, go ahead, Marie.
Hi, Marie Dowling, landscape architect on this project. Yeah, you know, we wanted to look at doing this space on basically a grid. You know, we thought a grid really makes sense because your standard tent for festivals. You have the arts festival. You have all these other different festivals around this city. It makes sense to get them to a central place, and it makes sense to happen. And so this became a very central part of our plan was thinking about how these tents really work within this space and how festivals work within this space. It's still possible to have this main spine through the center and have gatherings happen on both sides of that. So again, this space has to work for many different uses, many different ways, and that was key to this part of the project.
Great, thank you. I'll turn it over to other folks on the board here.
I guess in general, I think the design is very exciting, very nice styling and all that. Just kind of piggybacking on the comments about the plaza space, it looks like a very nice space. I just, you know, we have a handful of festivals throughout the year, but there's a lot of the year that, most days we don't have a festival, and 6 months out of the year, you're not going to want to sit out there. Just kind of, is it too much space to give up to, I guess, just hardscape? Did you guys consider pushing the buildings closer to Detroit or actually lining Detroit with the buildings to kind of continue that downtown feel? I guess, did you explore that at all, or was this?
Explore that? I mean, we did, but we really believe that you've got that feel up and down Detroit Road. Those are not going to be transformative projects that are going to draw people in. This acre of land is going to be a focal point, even if you shut the street down. All those planters that we have all have seating areas on both sides of them. The restaurants we're planning to put in are going to have outdoor seating, and I think it'll be more than 6 months out of the year. We plan on doing a Christmas tree lighting there every year. We'll do Christmas caroling. You will get use at least 10 months out of the year. January and February, maybe those are not going to be used unless there are winter activities. But there are a number of festivals, the beer festival. I mean, there's a whole bunch of Lakewood festivals that will utilize the space. And we'll have special events there for children, for health. I mean, we've talked to the Cleveland Clinic about utilizing the space. They'll do outdoor health screenings in the summertime and before children go back to school. We've explored a number of activities that could be utilized in that area that are not currently being done in the city of Lakewood. So we're hoping to expand utilization.
I just wanted to piggyback.
If I may add to that, I mean, we're not adverse if you feel that the size of this plaza is overly large. I mean, there are obviously, through the planning process, things that we can look at to try and address that concern.
I was going to piggyback off of what Dan had said. You guys have actually said something in your presentation that I kind of latched onto. You said that your peers would kind of evoke the feeling of a storefront along Detroit Avenue. And I thought, why isn't it a storefront? I actually wrote down a quote as I was looking over the presentations over the last week or so from William White, who did case studies of plazas in New York City and what they did and how people use them. And it was, "The street is the river of life of the city. They come to these places not to escape, but to partake of it. So I kind of see Detroit Avenue as our river, and that's where all the activity is in downtown Lakewood, and that's where all of the pedestrians are coming from. And you're saying that it's pedestrian-oriented and pedestrian-friendly. Well, I don't see it being connected to Detroit. People can drive here, park in the parking lot, and they don't even have to come to Detroit. They don't have to come to Bell. They don't have to come to Marlow. They can park, go into that two-story lobby, and go to the stores and the restaurants, and then leave without ever touching Detroit or the city of Lakewood. So I'm kind of struggling to see how this works into the rest of Lakewood. Maybe it is making the plaza smaller, maybe it's bringing something closer to Detroit.
I think from our perspective, putting the buildings along Detroit Road shuts the area off to the people that are going to be utilizing it and going up and down Detroit Road. If you've got 500 office workers, they're sure not going to all be eating lunch in 2 or 3 restaurants that are in our buildings. They're going to go up and down Detroit Road. And we fully expect that that will happen. I think this opens it up to the street. I think having festivals here, when they close Detroit Road down for summer festivals, this becomes a small part of the number of people. This won't hold thousands of people, but it will hold a couple hundred people. And it's going to be a nice complement to what's going on up and down Detroit Road. I don't see how moving the buildings closer to the street helps create that iconic, transformative gathering space that the city of Lakewood's been looking for a lot of years. And I mean, if at the end of the day, is that what you guys want, then we'll acquiesce and make the changes. But at this point, I think what we've designed is what's going to help create that transformative project for the city of Lakewood.
And you know, and using your metaphor, if Detroit Road is the river, I consider our plaza the harbor. That's the location where everybody can come and they can congregate and they can identify with it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be exclusive of whatever occurs down on Detroit Road. Our whole intent was so that it would be interactive with it and support it.
Also, we think we're taking some of the we're not encouraging any parking on the side streets. We really want to take parking off those streets so people can walk. Our project's going to have bicycle racks in the garage and in the plaza so that people can use bicycles, and walking is encouraged over vehicular traffic in that area. We really would like to resolve some of the parking issues that occur along those side streets and make it easier for the people that live south of this project to get in and out of where they go. And so that's kind of why, I mean, you know, I think some may think we've over-designed the garage. And, you know, maybe into the future that's true, but our garage is going to be full level to each floor so that each level of the garage services that floor of the office or retail. And I think that's important. But
well, thank you. Yeah, it's funny because when I first saw this proposal, my gut reaction was there should be something along the edge of Detroit, you know, that carrying the old building, you know, that like Lakewood has. But the more I understand this, I'm getting to like the plaza outside, but I agree with everyone, though. I don't like the way the edge is created right now. It's creating too much separation between the street and the sidewalk and our city. It's like we are here and you are there kind of a thing. And I think just some subtle changes can fix that, though. To me, that's not an insurmountable.
Just a very rigorous programming of the space by you or, I mean, by the city. I mean, well, I don't know if it's a public park and the city can program it, or if it's just all by the developer and you would be managing it.
We're happy to work with you on that. We're happy to make changes. We just don't want to lose the integrity of the project and what we believe is going to make it successful long into the future. I think you need to have that something special there that's going to draw the corporate. Lakewood has had a difficult time over the last few years drawing corporate office tenants. Mm-hmm. And that's to the detriment of your tax base, your infrastructure work, and this is critically important that we have that type of draw that will keep them there. And a lot of people that work here are probably going to live in the area. They're going to walk back and forth to work, and we think this encourages it. And by the way, it's open to everybody in Lakewood.
And I also like, I mean, if you take all the people out of that rendering, you really can understand the transparency of the buildings behind that surround the plaza. And I think that is going to provide a lot of activity, that where it says city, that piece in the background there.
Yeah.
Yep.
That building looks pretty transparent in this rendering. And if you took all the people out of there, all the visual noise that they're creating, and you look at this thing as what it is, I think that helps draw people into that space.
Well, the one thing you see in our design, a lot of glass.
Right, that's what I mean,
And-
it's very
And
transparent.
we haven't
so
seen
you
that
see
on,
the activity.
we've gone up and down Detroit Road, and we've looked at a lot of the buildings in Lakewood. And I think one of the things that dates the buildings is the lack of
Right.
glass. And we wanted to prevent that in this building, and that's why
Yeah, I like
KA
that.
did what
I
they
like
did.
that, yeah.
I do have a question about that. Is there a reason that you oriented the residential tower east-west instead of north-south? Is it a double-loaded apartment tower?
It would be
So
yes, it would be a double-loaded tower, yes.
if you go north-south, then
Oh,
it
yeah,
seems
the
like
tower.
both sides of that hallway would be able to have views of the lake. If you're going north-south, the whole south side of the apartments would just be looking south and wouldn't have views of the lake. I didn't know if there was a reason that you
Oriented
did east-west
east-west.
instead of.
Yeah.
It's
we currently-
oriented
Yes.
east-west.
Yes, but she's suggesting if it went
Yeah.
north-south, both sides would have a view of the lake.
Right.
How would the south see the lake?
Well,
It was turned 90
If it's
degrees.
turned 90 degrees.
it's turned 90 degrees.
I see
You
what
can
you're
look
saying.
east and
That's
see
a
the
thought.
lake.
That's-
I was just wondering
we
if
could-
there was
we-
a reason that you oriented it the way you did.
Reason, Rich?
There is actually, yes.
Leave it to
That's
the
how
art-
it fit.
Yeah, the architect.
to the
sure.
architect.
Is the main reason. But seriously, we wanted to have a high-rise concept that wasn't an afterthought. This is designed to exist with that tower all the time, so we're actually scaled it back to do the mid-rise. So to make the high-rise, in our mind, feel very compatible with the neighborhood, even though it's a much taller structure, we thought putting the short ends on the residential streets would be much better. So orienting a long building along parallel to Bell and Marlow would create, sort of a wall for those neighbors. When they look up towards the sky, they're going to see a large building. In this orientation, they see a very skinny tower from the side. And then we also stepped it back from the plaza, which in this configuration, the size of the plaza forces it back so far. And then instead of taking that high-rise further back south, we thought it would be better to keep it sort of lining the plaza but set back subtly. And you're right, some units face south, which have a great view that isn't the lake, and the other ones face north, and the prices of the unit should reflect it.
That's a great question, Richard, great answer. I wanted to use that to transition to the public question portion of this section. So I'm going to turn over to Lou to ask our first public question on our green sheet, and then we'll volley back and forth between Dave and Lou, and hopefully get responses from Carnegie. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Please keep them coming. Going just by the number here, the first question I'll ask is a composite question, a variation on a theme, and it's a question about the design and retail and the market analysis and extent of retail. And there's a couple aspects of that. One, just giving retail in general and competitive pressures nationally and locally that we've seen with retail in different places under pressure, some of the big retailers in particular. So your market analysis of the retail here, and did that include what effect that will have on existing Lakewood businesses, and are existing Lakewood businesses eligible to participate in this? I think I've tried to, that's enough in one loaded question from 9 sources. Try that.
That's an interesting question because our research showed national tenants don't do well in Lakewood. And we understand that. And we also know retail, according to some, is a dying industry. Amazon's putting them all out of business. So what we've targeted are tenants that are unique, that are service and convenience-oriented tenants that will serve the residents, serve the people up and down Detroit Road, and not compete with businesses that are already here. None of the tenants we're talking to currently are located in Lakewood. You know, if you've read our proposal, I mean, I don't know, we've got some letters of intent in there, and they are for tenants that are interested. We probably have spoken to tenants that will, hopefully, if we can come to terms with them on leases, will take about half the space. And we really haven't started an effort because we don't have a floor plan, and so we don't really have anything to show them other than, you know, the demographics of Lakewood and the fact that there isn't a competitor of theirs in the city that does what they do. And those have been really our selling points. But we understand that. That's why there's flexibility in our design. If the second floor retail doesn't lease up, we can convert to office. If we have too much office, the top floor converts to penthouse units that are larger 3 and 4 bedroom units, because there is a market for those. The buildings on the lake always had their penthouses sold, and they were filled. And with the green amenities that are going to be outside those top floors, I think they're very marketable.
Thank you.
Great. These are all great groupings of questions. If you have any more, feel free to send them to us. This one says, I appreciate the focus on pedestrian access, but will infrastructure be added for cyclists? And also, what about public transit access?
Yes, to both the cyclist. We'll have bicycle accessibility with racks at the entry to the garage area and on the plaza. And we haven't negotiated with the transit authority, but we fully expect there will be a bus stop, at least one bus stop right at the front entrance to this project.
Thank you.
Great. There's at least 4 people were listening very closely when you said expanding the footprint. So that caught some attention here. Can you expand on your statement about expanding the footprint and what that could mean?
Sometimes I say some really stupid things. The price just went up on everything. No, I can't.
Okay.
We're looking at other properties in the area. There are leases on some buildings that come due within a year, and we're talking to the owners of those properties to see if they would be willing to sell or to relocate the tenants they have into a portion of our project.
Thank you.
All right, next up, a couple of folks asked the question, can any of the original hospital, the Detroit-facing part, not the rest, be incorporated, any of that facade?
We are incorporating the archway.
Other than the archway.
And we're going to use bricks from the hospital in parts of the building. Can we? We haven't looked at it. Have we looked at it? No. I mean, nothing's out of the question. We can, but I'm not really sure what portions they're specifically talking about.
Just the front part that faces Detroit, what looks like the original.
The windows, the brick, you know.
I don't know. It's up to you guys. I'm just asking the question. So.
Probably not. Probably not more than the brick and the archway.
Right. Could I do a quick follow-up on that? I did have one question also about the notion of a hotel, and I'll paraphrase that question to put that in terms of this design obviously doesn't incorporate it. Beautifully, I think, incorporates the Curtis block. The other building, though, can you talk about why it wasn't incorporated into this, just for that question? That part of the hospital that we're talking about.
You're talking, I'm not sure what you're talking
The
about.
old part of the hospital is not incorporated into this design, and there's a question about the whole building, that whole part of it.
I don't have an answer for that one. I'm not sure.
Which is fine.
Are you talking about the little building behind the Curtis block?
Yeah, the old brick facade building that actually has the arch on it now. Okay, no answer is fine.
Answer.
Lou?
3 separate questions on your point about how will Lakewood workers or construction employees be eligible or be incorporated into this job? You made mention of it. There's 3 questions here similar on that subject.
Well, we've reached an agreement with the labor union, Terry Joyce's group, and they have 450 members that live in Lakewood. And I think Turner Construction, who's going to be our lead contractor, utilizes a lot of them already. And so those people will get preference to work on this project through Turner and through the laborers union.
Thank you.
I'll jump in. One question, how many homes will be torn down? Any?
If the city's tearing them down, we'll take them, but we're not planning on it.
To be very clear on that, city is not tearing down any homes as of right now.
So we can settle that right now.
Question. The community vision and our parking code in particular talk about trying to achieve improvements in our stormwater management. It's a big issue in Lakewood. A question from the audience, with the proposed green infrastructure, the bioretention in the plaza, is this design trying to achieve zero runoff, or what level, is there any extra stormwater management other than the footprint that you have today?
I think we're talking zero runoff, and we're also talking about not using potable water for any of the green outside. We're going to use all the stormwater that we generate to water everything, including the rooftops.
So that includes all the planting elements?
All the
that you talk
planters,
about in
the
plaza will be
trees.
connected to that?
Yes, everything in the plaza as well as the upper green elements.
Thank you.
All right, here's a meaty one for you to chew on. This design in no way nods to the historical beauty of Lakewood. This is a key piece of your mission. Please explain.
I disagree. I mean, I'm not sure.
How does it work with the historical nature of Lakewood?
Well, we're using elements from the hospital, and I think the design is timeless. I don't believe, if you look at the housing units that wrap the garage, they're going to have they're going to have outdoor porches, and they're going to have the window system that works similarly to what's in the area. And I think it's just going to have a nice look to it. I'm not sure what you mean, what exact historic elements you're talking about. Richard?
Thank you, Doctor. Our approach was really to deliver a very contemporary design to Lakewood. You know, as we worked as a team, I think we kind of all agreed that that would be the right approach and would resonate with the residents. But by no means are we saying it has to. And the elements that we tried to incorporate would be the brick, the stone masonry. We echoed the curve and sort of a memory of the hospital in addition to reusing the colonnade. We used that curved corner motif in several spots on the site as a way to acknowledge that history and build that into the story of the site. But, you know, if the public told us, hey, we want something that looks more historic, that really echoes some of the eclectic or certain historic styles in Lakewood, then, you know, by all means, we would entertain it. But we just thought this was our best shot out of the box, what we think is the right approach.
I'll do a quick follow-up, and one of the things that we talk about a lot at the ABR is about scale and rhythm in the streetscape. And so whether the buildings are set back from the street, that's a whole other discussion. But I think that just from my standpoint, and perhaps the whole board, we do encourage that sort of cadence and rhythm that you are showing in this. And so there's brick, there's scale. It's not just a big round cube or round glass building or something.
You know, and
Round cubes. Yeah. We do know what we're doing.
if I may pick up on
Looks
that.
like a commercial building.
It does feel like a commercial building, correct, yeah. And
Well,
so I don't really feel that you've gone over the top in terms of a hyper-contemporary building at all.
Well, and I think it's a function as well that we're identifying, as you indicated, there is the commercial district, the portion along Detroit Road that has a number of different architectural styles that front all along its length. And I think that what we've done here is taken the lead on that kind of differences in commercial architecture with something that is truly, it's definitely bold, but we think with the massing and the use of stone and the glass and the reflective nature of the elevations, it creates some animation to the elevation and really something that can work with the scale of the surrounding area. But as Dr. Corey mentioned, as you move to the south, then the architectural style and character and scale completely changes. And that's to be sensitive, and that's in an effort to be sensitive to the adjacent housing and the styles that exist there. We start changing the massing, we start using brick, we start using the porches that he's talking about with obviously not as much glass, and it completely changes. And we think that it becomes very contextual in that regard and very sensitive to the surroundings.
Mr. Chair, we're going to try to get through one more group of questions, or one more question from Planning Commission, and another group of questions, one more question from ABR.
Thank you. You mentioned in your talk about the price point and distinguishing your project from even perhaps the building across the street or other things in the area. And there are a number of questions here about the analysis of what is the price point or what range and what is the market demographic that you're going after for the residential units specifically.
Well, we've spoken at length with Brad Coet, who's doing the building across the street, and we know where his price point is. The difference in our price point's probably 20% higher than what he's getting, like $1.38 to $1.40 a square foot. We are going to be higher than that, but we also are providing a type of housing unit that isn't right now in Lakewood. It was probably here 40 years ago when they did, the Winton Place and the Carlisle and those buildings along the lake, but it hasn't been in our generation developed yet. And we believe that there is a market for those units, and we believe it doesn't have to be in Westlake, and it doesn't have to be in downtown Cleveland. We think Lakewood is the perfect medium for those units, and we think we can get that.
Thank you.
Great. One wrap up for us then. We've talked a lot about up to the tower piece of this or the mid-rise, but beyond that, you mentioned a little bit, George, about those the housing units. And so this question, I think, dovetails nicely. A person would like to know the quality of the craftsmanship on the construction. So we've talked about brick and these solid materials, but when it comes to the residential units where we need to scale down to the residential parts of things, if you could address some of what you guys are looking at from that standpoint.
Well, when you talk
Quality of construction, materials for the residential area, just quality of construction in general.
This is Joe Lazaro from Turner Construction.
I mean, I guess when I hear the word quality, I'm thinking of the craftsmanship employed to put it in. So obviously we're a union contractor, signatory to carpenters and laborers, and we've done a lot of union work, and they have tremendous craftsmen that achieve a ton of awards, okay? So I think if that's what you're talking about, I think our reputation stands on its own. If you're talking the types of materials, and if that's what
all
you're
of that, with your work being the end result, but on the front end, the materials, right down to how it's put together, and so folks can kind of get a feel of what your approach is to materials and construction.
I don't know that I can speak to the materials we're talking about in the townhouses. I mean, we haven't.
Or maybe Rich would like to.
I'm sorry.
Maybe Rich would like to from the architect standpoint. Well,
My thought is that the townhomes are actually very integral to the rest of the construction. I don't really see this being, and speak up if I'm incorrect, but they're not going to spin this off to a builder to create the townhomes. It should be under the same general contract for the entire site. That same level of oversight that Turner lends to all the construction would go to every component of the project.
I think what he's asking, though, is the materials that we're going to use are going to be high-quality materials, best available in the market for that type of construction. But those homes are not going to look a lot different than what some of the homes up and down the street look like. That's, we thought, was really important. What you're probably going to get is you're going to get the garage for the unit on the first floor with a first floor master suite with a living area above it and a master suite above that, and then maybe a third floor with a balcony, an outdoor balcony that each unit can have access to. But it's going to have a home feel to it, and it's going to be a lot of brick. It's probably going to be a different type of window. It's going to, you know, maybe a double hung or a window that you see typically in residential construction. It's not going to have a commercial construction feel. That's really important. It has to, look what they've done at Crocker Park. If you look at what they've done in the very back at Crocker Park, those homes look more like what's on Georgia Drive in Savannah Estates than it does look like what's in Crocker Park, the commercial side of it. And it's a balancing act, but it can be done.
Okay, great, thank you. I think that's it for us.
Mr. Chair, we are off to a great start tonight. I want to thank everybody. These questions are incredibly thoughtful. Please keep them coming. But I do want to take this moment to thank the Carnegie team. Let's give them a round of applause for presenting this tonight.